Welcome to Leadership Moments.
In every great leader's life, there are pivotal moments that shape their character, test their resilience, and awaken their vision.
Together, we'll uncover the invaluable lessons hidden within these transformative moments. Today, our guest is Russell Creed. Russell is the founder of Invictus Life Coaching, where he helps high-achieving leaders get unstuck, refocused, and fired up to write their next chapter. Russell has successfully held positions as Chief Innovation Officer, Chief Actuary, and Chief Underwriter for a major insurance company. Despite the successes, he knows the pain of not living up to your true potential. It was only when he was sidelined with a life-altering illness that his true passion and purpose came into view. Knowing that so many successful leaders were struggling with stagnation in their personal and professional lives, Russell became a certified David Bayer coach, one of Fortune 500's fastest growing coaching companies, and built a program that helps leaders take back their destiny. Through a mix of neuroscience, cognitive mindset work, and spirituality, he helps leaders reach a new level of confidence, drive, and authenticity. Today, you're going to hear a great survival story and how it changed Russell to lead differently. Let's jump in. Russell, I am so excited and thankful for you joining today. You have a wonderful story that I want to prep our listeners for that might be a little hard to hear, but I think is so important to hear. And it's important that you are taking the time and sharing it with us. You have a great story about how you have had to fight for your life, literally, while you were in the middle of leading teams professionally. And I'd love for you to share that with our listeners.
Yeah, first of all, Stacey, I'm so excited to be here with you and very grateful for the invitation to come and share my story. Let me share my story because it is a story of survival and thrival. I was a chief actuary at a Fortune 500 subsidiary. So it's a pretty high level job within the insurance industry. I led about a third of the company when I was diagnosed with a very rare liver disease. The disease is called primary sclerosing cholangitis. I know that's a big mouthful, and so I will call it PSC from now on. That's what we all call it in our circles of people that have had this. And it's a very rare disease. It's somewhat an autoimmune disease, but they don't really know what causes this thing. I was someone who felt like I was doing all the right things, living a healthy life, big family. I have 5 kids, beautiful wife, very involved with my family, involved with my work, involved with my community. And here I was given this, essentially a death sentence. There is no cure for PSC. The only palliative solution is a liver transplant. And so I was quickly put on the transplant list when this was discovered, and then began a long journey of my health continuing to deteriorate while I waited for a liver. Now, the only way you get an organ is if you are the sickest person in your region, and then something becomes available. So it's really this long march towards deterioration of your health. And so I was still leading teams at this time, and every day up and down, sometimes so tired I could barely get to work, because when your liver starts to shut down, your energy drops. If anyone's ever been in a car where the fuel filter gets all clogged up and it just has no go, it doesn't want to move, that's what it's like. Every day you're exhausted. Every day you wake up and you're just, I don't know how I'm going to get through the day. And somehow you still have to show up and lead teams. And thankfully, I had a great team around me who understood and was caring and knew what they were about, so that we could still accomplish the things that we needed to accomplish in the workplace. I was every day weaker and weaker and more tired. Another thing that PSC has, this horrible side effect, really, is that you itch all the time. In the community of PSC, there's this slogan that we're always itching for a cure. It's kind of a play on words, because you walk around itching all the time. It's like having poison ivy. If you've ever had poison ivy, that itchy feeling, it's all over your body, even in my ears.
Oh my goodness.
And I would come home from work, pull my socks down, and I would scratch my legs for like 20 minutes just to try and get some relief. It was one of those things that you're constantly scratching all over the place. And the doctors didn't believe me, but I had this correlation where I had a constant cough that showed up, which made it difficult in leading meetings and presentations and so forth. Again, thankfully, I had a supportive team that understood and helped me. One of the things I think is so important as leaders is that you build that bench, right? That you build that team with the understanding that someday I'm not going to be here. And I'm really always building towards the person who is replacing me. I mean, that became so much more of a focus for me when I thought my life was near the end. I actually hired my replacement, trained them, not expecting to really survive this. Being on the transplant list is a challenge because not everyone makes it. It's pretty high probability that you don't. 16 people every day die just waiting for a transplant because there's such a shortage of organ donors in our country. So that was my life for 6 years, finding the way to muster the energy to stay up with my teams. I often took naps under my desk in the afternoon just so I could get through the day. Took in a little yoga mat, put it under the desk and a pillow, but that's what it took. And so I kept showing up and my team kept supporting me. As you can tell, I'm one of the lucky ones who received a transplant. So I'm here today because of that. And if it wasn't harrowing enough beforehand, my challenge really started afterwards. So after I was in recovery, there's this process that happens in our minds a lot of times when we go through a very traumatic event, and especially when the mind doesn't know where the enemy is. It's built for survival. It fires off all these things. I didn't realize this at the time. I've had to do a lot of study about how the brain operates afterwards. But at the time, as my brain is trying to figure out who was the enemy in all this, who tried to kill me, it landed on my job and my wife. We're not going to talk about that part of the story today. But we'll talk about the job because I developed this adversarial relationship with my job, thinking it was the reason I was sick. It was the thing that was killing me, right? And this was all happening on a subconscious level, but it shows up in a very conscious way in how we act and interact. And so I started to really hate going to work again, hate being and doing what I was about. All the things, I mean, it was a very visceral dislike for what was going on in my life at the time. And a lot of it, looking back now, was because of this primal activity that happens in our subconscious to try and figure out what was trying to kill us and start to protect us from it. So I was in this state of very down, almost suicidal, almost like I wasn't ready to end it all. Why did I survive for this kind of life? So that's the state I was in. And I knew some things needed to change. I ran across an ad on Facebook. A lot of times when we are in that place where we don't really enjoy life and we're looking for distractions, what do? We grab this thing, we start scrolling, and we're just wasting time in distraction because we don't want to deal with what's really there.
Right.
But I came across an ad for the Fit Father program, which is about men in their 40s that were looking to get back their health so that it can be around for their families. Even though I was in this state of, I don't really like the way things are going, I knew something needed to change. So I jumped in that program. Interestingly enough, one of the things that the program recommended beyond the nutrition, beyond the exercise, all the things you would expect to be there, was all this component. There was this addendum about, if you want to do this the best possible way, do all these things. Actuaries are high achievers. Actuaries are the number one job in America for many years. So I wanted to do the best that I could in this program. So I did it. And what did it say? It was like, you need to sit down and come up with a vision for why you're doing this. And you want to implement all these practices in your life in a morning routine, practice gratitude every day, read good books every day, blah, 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 blah. All these sort of processes. And so I started doing that, and just because it said to, not because I was like, all right, if this is what's going to work, I'm going to do it. So my first practice of gratitude was sort of forced. I was in this place where I couldn't find things that I was grateful for. And the charge was to write down 3 things every day that you're grateful for. So I always started every day with, I'm grateful to be alive.
Mm-hmm.
But I wasn't. But I
Mm-hmm.
wrote it down. And then I would struggle to find a couple of other things to be grateful for. The bird chirping outside the window, right? Or my coffee this morning, which is helping me wake up. Whatever it was, I would find some things, but it was always a struggle. But every day, I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful to be alive. I'm grateful to be alive. It's probably about 6 months of that before I woke up and I realized that, oh, my life had completely changed. I actually was grateful to be alive. And I was seeing all the positive in all the things that were in my life. And things started to change. I mean, I took on a new role where I was beyond chief actuary. I had to give up that role because I'd already passed it on to someone else. But when I came back, I became a portfolio manager, helping integrate actuarial and our sales. And then I got the opportunity to become the chief innovation officer to help change culture within the company so that we would be a more innovative company that was more responsive to change and able to capitalize on that throughout the entire organization, not just through the leadership, which often drives those things. It was through this practice of gratitude, my life really transformed. As I started to learn about new things and how the brain operates, our brain, the limbic system in our brain is very focused on the negative. It's out there designed to help find the things that are coming after us, like those saber-toothed tigers that don't really exist anymore. But that's what most of the neurons in your limbic system are designed to keep you aware of the dangers in life. Only a small portion of it is there to help foster these positive emotions. And so it takes a lot of work to actually create that in your life and to bring that into existence. We have to focus on it way more than we do on the negative things. So this is one thing I started to bring in to my leadership within the workforce, recognizing that as a leader, most of my time I'm focused on the problems, trying to find solutions to the problems, really focus on that negative aspect of what's not working and rarely focused on what was working. But it was through that shift to what's working, what's going well, where can we celebrate? How can we express gratitude for what is, that we began to get that momentum to create more.
Within the company, the culture
Within
that
the
you
company,
changed.
yeah. And even especially within my own life, as I share that and help others transform their lives, that's one of the key components that we utilize. But yes, even within the company and within the culture within the company.
Yeah. Such an amazing story. There's so much there I want to dive into, but I just want to pause for a second and say thank you
Sure.
again for sharing your story, being vulnerable. Part of leadership is being able to be vulnerable. And you sharing this, I know we have some listeners out there that this is going to help them. Maybe if they're going through it themselves, maybe if they have family member, or even if they have someone on their team that might be going through something similar. So really, really appreciate you sharing this and telling us this story. There's so much in there. I want to get back to the gratitude part because I do a lot of work in emotional intelligence and there's a piece to that. And so I hear you and I totally believe in what you're saying. But I first want to talk about the piece that you said, hey, we as leaders, we need to look at our succession plan. We need to
Mhm.
be able to say who is going to replace us so we can move on. Your move on at the time was, I might be moving on from this earth, if I may
Yes.
say that, right? And so that takes a different perspective, makes it obviously more serious. But you could have easily said, you know what, I need to focus on me right now and not the organization, where you were doing both, it sounds like, at the same time. And that's admirable, first. And second is, how was that different for you in creating that succession plan? What would you tell our listeners? Hey, when you're creating succession plan, this is something you should consider, whether you're leaving for another position to be promoted, whether you're leaving the organization, or whether you are planning on leaving this earth, maybe retirement as well. But
Right.
what was different that you could tell other leaders and our listeners on building that succession plan and helping them?
Yeah. I'd point to two things in this. One is a sense of urgency, right? And that was forced upon me. It's not something I would have naturally created, is this sense of urgency to take care of this, because it's easy to fall into that mindset that I've got plenty of time, that this is what I'm going to be doing for a long time. It's not something that I need to hurry up and be prepared for. And so generating that sense of urgency is one thing that I think is important. Find your number two right now. That's going to become number one, and begin to bring them in and help train them along the way. You never know. I mean, mine was PSC, could be a bus one day, right? That suddenly you unexpectedly stepped in front of. We have no idea. And so now is really the only time we have to take action. So one is that sense of urgency. And two, it does take effort. You have to be mindful and purposeful and intentional about having someone and bringing them in and having them shadow. And when we're busy leaders, that can seem like a burden. Oh, I don't have time to bring this person in. And it also seems less efficient, right? Because like, oh, they could be doing this and I need to be doing that. But it's really committing to finding that time to where you're actually doing that shadow work, not shadow work as in personal shadow work, but them shadowing with you on how to do what you're doing and pulling back that veil. So scheduling time weekly to do that, bring them, finding those opportunities to bring in that who you have in mind so they can actually do the work while you sit back and then you have your debrief afterwards. And it's so important to begin that early and to be consistent.
Yeah, I love the sense of urgency because I always tell leaders the first day you start the job is the day you start looking for your replacement. Same
Yes.
day,
Yes.
because you just never know when that opportunity is going to happen, what's going to change, and how things are going to go. So I love that sense of urgency piece. And
Yeah.
then the intentional piece and being deliberate. It is hard for some people to delegate and let go. And I
Mhm.
love how you brought in have them shadow, do the debrief after really key points that are super important. So I love that you have those pieces added as well to be intentional. And we have to be able to give up because if you are delegating, if you are teaching other people, now that helps you do other things, whether it's getting your health taken care of, whether
Yes.
it's working on another project, whether it's saying yes to that promotion or that other opportunity. If you aren't delegating before that, you're going to be so overloaded, you're not going to be able to do those things. So I love those two key pieces. So let's go back to gratitude. I love doing this. So you talk about how you had the three things that you wrote down and you wrote down
Yes.
the happy to be alive. I did this with my children when they were little. We always sit and had dinner together. Even if it was only 5 minutes that we inhaled our food, it was the time that the family was together. And I
Right.
used to ask them, what do you appreciate today? They're like, oh, mom, rolling their eyes. I'm happy that I had recess today, or I'm happy that I got
Right.
lunch today. Over time, when I kept pushing it, it started changing to true things that they actually appreciated. So
Yes.
I just kept doing it. It did probably take 6 months and sometimes people longer, but the fact that you kept doing it, you finally did hit that realization, and it does work. I
Yes.
saw it in my own children who were very negative in the beginning, and now that they do that as well. So I really love that. What I'd love for you to talk about is maybe a little bit more of how you leverage that with teaching that within your organization to
Mhm.
transform the culture.
Yeah. A couple things that I did within my teams is we started to make that gratitude part of the practice. So even just starting meetings, and we'd have weekly meetings. What is something that you're grateful for? And you're right. In the beginning, it's often always, I'm grateful for my family and my job. That's where it starts. But it's through that persistent action and that consistency of asking it and asking for more. Oh, tell me more. What are you really grateful for about those things? That it starts to open up. And you're right, as it becomes a practice, it becomes deeper and more meaningful. One of the things that we also added into our team meetings was a time for acknowledgement. So not only what are we grateful for ourselves, but what are we grateful for about others? That was a moment that really, again, in the beginning, very uncomfortable. Nobody wants
Right.
to be acknowledged. It's not natural for us anymore to be acknowledged and to say, hey, Stacy, you're doing a fantastic job. I really appreciate how you bring around the conversation and pull things back that we've talked about and dive deeper. You're doing great, right? It's not always natural for us to do that in such a deliberate fashion. But again, through practice, through consistency, through showing up and being okay with it in the beginning, not being very much, that's okay. That's what began to open up. And as you create that into the culture of your team and it becomes more natural, it happens all the time, not just during your team meetings, not just during the time of acknowledgement and our meeting time, but it's happening day to day or in the chats or in the email messages. And it's through that where you start to build that collaborative culture by really being intentional about how you acknowledge and show your gratitude for others.
I'm curious, with increasing the gratitude, has it increased feedback, meaning not just positive feedback? Obviously, I'm assuming positive feedback, but also opportunistic feedback. Did you increase that to increase the collaboration as well?
My experience for my team was that they became much more engaged. They were willing to share where they saw opportunities, where before they might not. They'd be very reserved. There was a sense of freedom to share and collaborate that wasn't there before. So yes, I think that begins to build a foundation that allows for a more authentic, more open communication. Because we already know that we built a culture of positivity, of looking for what's working, and we see it all the time. So if we see something that's not working, that's fine. It's not adding into the pile of all the stuff we're always complaining about. We don't have a lot of complaining on a team. It's more of, now, how can we go fix this? How can we make this better? That's what the conversation becomes all the time. It's not just, this isn't working. It's, I noticed this, and now how can we make it better?
Yeah, and you start making it safe. I love the idea that you say it really starts empowering them, that they feel like they can say something because you're inviting them to do that. And we often forget that that is the key piece in order for people to feel like they can give feedback. We talk about safety, but it
Yes.
is, I don't know, can I speak up? Is this okay? Really good points to bring up there. And you're right. We want to be careful about the feedback sandwich, which is I'm going to give you good, I'm going to give you some bad in the middle, and then I'm going to give you good. So, listeners, please don't ever give a feedback sandwich. There's so much proof and identity and research that feedback sandwiches are not good. So, it sounds like getting it started, maybe putting it as an agenda item on team meetings, even if it's 5-10 minutes. I used to do something similar. I called it wins and acknowledgments. I'd start off every meeting that way and just open it up to the floor. And then I would always tell people, hey, this is open for the rest of the meeting. So if we're halfway through the meeting and you think of something that you wanted to give someone appreciation about, then just go ahead and speak up in the middle of the meeting and it starts working. Are there any other advice or ideas on how you could get started for these leaders that maybe don't have this today?
I love what I called mine wins and acknowledgments as well. And it was a very important part. And we started early in our meeting during the process, but at some point I moved it to the end because I wanted us to walk away celebrating each other instead of getting to the problems at the end and figuring out how are we going to solve all the problems, which we always did in our meetings too. You got to address what's not working. I eventually added mine to the end, and I feel like that made a difference because we
Love
were
it.
stepping away in a mindset of, yeah, we're doing great. And instead of focused on all the things that weren't working.
That is a great
Yeah.
idea. Love that. Any
Well,
other ideas to give our listeners?
yeah, pull it into your one-on-ones as well. That's the other place. I have found that gratitude is the fastest tool to shift your mind. And one of the powerful questions that I often ask myself and I ask others when we're in a state of complaining or focused on what's not working, how is this working for you? And when you stop to think about that, things begin to open up and you begin to shift. Because you can tell, like when you're in that state of complaining, you're anxious and frustrated, whatever those feelings that don't feel good are. That's how you're feeling, and all you see are the problems. But when you force yourself to stop and think, how is this actually working for them? You start to see other things. So maybe you've got an employee that doesn't seem to be performing properly at your standards or whatever. And that's leading to frustration. I get that, right? Someone's not doing what you expect them to do, then there's frustration that's going to be there. But when you can stop and think, all right, how is this working for me? Well, maybe it's highlighting where you haven't been clear. And so now as a leader, you have an opportunity to step up and put more clear objectives, instructions, expectations out there to elevate the whole team. Or maybe it's highlighting something that you haven't been paying attention to, and doing whatever it is that you don't like is actually your tool to see how can I be better as a leader. And so that's a way to see it that's when you start to see it that way. Now you start to act powerfully. You're taking control of the situation. You're doing things that actually move everyone forward instead of sitting there in that frustration and anger and disappointment. All from, how is this working for me?
I love that it forces you as a leader to am I actually seeking out and looking for those areas to be able to give that gratitude? Because
Mhm.
I know for me, I have a tendency to get very focused on what needs to get done. I love checking that box and being intentional around what are we doing to get to check that box and how are we achieving that, and those small little wins every day matter. Really key points. And I love the one-on-ones as well. Great idea. You mentioned that you did this class about men's health. When you and I have spoken before, you've talked about men's groups
Mhm.
and how you've done some focus with them. And I was really intrigued because, yes, we have what people would call men's groups like Elks Club and the Lodge and whatever that is. But this was different. And me being a female in technology for a large part of my career, me being in women's groups, or you see a lot of diversity groups, but you don't often hear of men's groups in the professional world. And
Mhm.
you really enlightened me on why that might be helpful. So could you tell our listeners the why behind it and just a little information around it?
Yeah, part of the why behind my starting some men's groups is because it was a crucial part of my growth and development and recovery after my transplant. One of the things that I realized that was missing in my life was having a core group of other men to support me, to understand what I'm going through, to have a place to either be a sounding board and to provide some guidance, or to basically give me a kick in the hiney to say, get off your story, get off your horse. As a professional, I was focused on my work, building my career, focused on taking care of my family, and I completely neglected developing my own tribe, my own friend group. And I think that happens very often for men. If you look at the statistics of men in their 40s and 50s, they have the highest rate of suicide in our nation, in our developed country. And a lot of it comes from this idea that I'm lonely, I'm out there on my own, I'm doing it all on my own, I got to carry the world on my shoulders, and there's no one else around me to help through that process. When you collaborate, when you get together with other men, which is what our culture has been for a really long time up until this new service-oriented world where we go off into our offices and our cubes and we're in isolation. But before that, we were farmers in the fields working shoulder by shoulder and doing all these things together. And you had that opportunity to build those bonds. It's much harder today. You have to be intentional about it. You have to go out and seek that. And I accidentally discovered I went to a men's retreat one time because it was nearby. And I'm like, oh, well, let's check this out. And I saw the men that were engaged that way. I'm like, oh my gosh, I've never had that in my life. I grew up in a single mother home, and I didn't even have a father around to really mold and guide that or to emulate what that looks like. But that was one key piece of my transformation. Was it was really around building a mindset that helped me deal with the things in life in a positive and effective and powerful way. It was starting to build a community around me, primarily of men that I could turn to, that could encourage me, that could hold me accountable to what I'm trying to achieve in life. And the third thing I talk about with men is really being clear on your purpose. So it's those three things that I think are key components to really living a powerful life.
Yeah, really amazing. I love those pieces. And to me, often I look at the minority group
Mhm.
and say, how can I help support them? How can I help make sure they feel empowered and engaged? And subconsciously, maybe I'm not paying attention. I'm just going to say it, the white men of the world. And the reality is, they also need that. And so I thank you for bringing that up. And I want our listeners to think about that is wherever you are, if you're a leader, you need to recognize everyone. And
Yes.
how do you empower and engage everyone and give them space to feel included? Anything else that you wanted to add for leaders to think about in finding their purpose and moving forward with their career?
Yeah, I think one of the things that's super important for leaders that we probably don't talk a lot about is really learning to be a leader of yourself. And what I mean by that is really understanding how your human operating system works so that you know what's going on from your emotional reactions to the things that you're thinking about and really developing an awareness around that and how that influences the things around you. Because it's when we understand and are aware that we can step in and make changes. So that's a very key component. That's what I learned through my journey of transformation and really in the recovery process, is that I had to get a hold of what was going on in my mind, which was basically a bunch of junk that wasn't true, but it sure seemed true to me at the time. I wasn't aware of how our thoughts really drive our reality. And when I began to be able to put some space between the thoughts that are coming in and out and really start to design how I want that system to work, that's when transformation really began. And it started with that gratitude piece. That's a piece of it. And there's so much more.
And so where's your journey taking you next?
Really focused on that piece and helping other leaders develop that awareness of how their human operating system is working. And when I talk about the human operating system, I'm talking about how the mind and the emotions and all those things operate to really guide us in life. And so once you understand how it works, then you can kind of hack into it to create what you really want. And so that's where I'm focused these days, is helping other leaders understand how that human operating system works and hack into it.
Love it. All right, there's that sound. It's time for our fun questions. Are you ready for the questions?
I am ready.
Okay. The first question is, what is your favorite sound?
Oh, so this is my favorite sound. I only get to hear it once a year, and it's almost a non-sound. It's that experience of the first snowfall. Yeah, every
Yes.
year. And that first snowfall, everything gets quiet and the whole world starts to go to sleep. And it's like the world pulled a blanket up over itself and it's just settling down and everything's muffled. And there's this element of this peace and serenity that settles in. And it's that muted quietness of the world. That is my favorite day of the year and my favorite sound.
I love that. I actually shovel my driveway rather than snowblow. And a lot of people think I'm crazy, but I go out there at 5 in the morning because it's so quiet and it
Yes.
is the most therapeutic, peaceful time of the day for me. And people are like, why do you love living in the snow? And that's the one reason why, is I love being out there because it's so quiet. You're right. I love the analogy of the blanket because it's very,
Yeah.
very true.
As the snow is falling, there's a little bit of that snowfall sound you hear, right?
Yes.
But and then everything else just like fades in the background.
That is great. I love it. All right. The next question is, what is your favorite family tradition?
We have a family tradition right after Thanksgiving when we set up our Christmas tree, which we typically do the weekend after Thanksgiving. And we have fondue fun night. I have no idea how this started. I don't remember why this became our tradition. But when we're setting up the Christmas tree, we're like, we have cheese fondue and all this stuff and a chocolate fondue that we do afterwards. And that has become a tradition. A couple of years ago, we're like, oh, why are we doing this? We don't need to do that. And all the kids are growing and they're out and getting into their own place, right? But when they came home, that's the one thing they wanted. We can't give that up. We have to have fondue fun night. And I was like, who does fondue for Christmas? We do, apparently.
That's right.
Yes.
That is wonderful. Yeah, a good fondue with a big family. It's so easy and fun
Yeah.
for sure. Well, Russell, thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you for the guidance and giving to people. I think the power of gratitude, you really showed it in your own experience. And I'm hoping that our leaders can take that away and start implementing that today with their
Yes.
teams as well. But really, good luck on your journey. We hope to have you back again and share with us your next journey and what's going on. So really looking forward to it. Thank you.
Stacey, it's been a pleasure to be here with you.
And that concludes another episode of Leadership Moments. We hope you found inspiration and valuable insights in what we shared today. Remember, leadership is not defined solely by titles or positions, but by the choices we make and the moments that shape us.
Embrace the challenges that come your way. They may be the very moments that propel you toward greatness. We'd love to hear your thoughts and stories as well. Connect with us on our website at leadershipmomentspodcast.com or through social media on Instagram at Tracy_Ann Palmer.
And Stacey Castor _. Remember, your leadership moment could be just around the corner, waiting for you to seize it. This is Stacey Castor, and what doesn't challenge you won't change you.
This is Tracy Ann Palmer, and be the change you wish to see in the world.